afforded American Jewry so much in the way of advantage and enterprise. And I'm looking at what's been happening over the past year and a half. We've seen 2 shootings in synagogues.
David, sorry to interrupt you. There's a bit of feedback coming from your computer. So if there are any devices or anything that's being recorded, you might have to switch them off.
No, I've got nothing. I've got nothing on. Nothing on.
Maybe it's not coming from you. Let's just check.
Was it that?
Possibly. Let's try again.
Okay. Rabbi, well, we've seen 2 serious shootings in synagogues in San Diego, Pittsburgh, 12 dead. We've seen a string of attacks over the course of the past couple of months on visibly looking Jewish people in Brooklyn, culminating in the attack at Monsey last Hanukkah. Recently, we've seen riots in Los Angeles, which seem to have been directed towards synagogues, schools, Jewish memorials, Jewish centers in Fairfax in Los Angeles. What's happening in America at the moment? Why are Jews being targeted in this way? What's the cause of it? And what would you say are the 2 most serious challenges facing American Jewry at the moment?
David, thank you very much. Rabbi Ginsburg, Rabbi Portnoy, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share the evening with David and with the congregation. Those are tough questions. I'm going to, in anything that I say, please, anyone who's listening, feel free to disagree, and I'll try to lay out the assumptions that I'm making in responding to those questions. In America, unfortunately, we are seeing a nation that's becoming divided. You really see it in Congress, the equivalent of our parliament, of the British Parliament. Historically, in Congress, you had 2 parties, but they spoke with each other, they worked with each other. They politicked against each other, but today they don't speak. Today they speak at each other, not with each other. And that's a symptom of what's happening in academia. That's a symptom of what's happening in the media in the United States. So you have a very polarized country. When there's a very strong centrist population, a middle class that is half center right, half center left, that's a good situation for Jews. Okay? When you have a situation of polarization, when you have extreme left and extreme right, and the voices in the center are muted, that's dangerous for Jews. And we are seeing manifestations of that. We have terrible, terrible anti-Semitism from the far left, and not nearly to the same degree, but when it manifests itself, it becomes very, very dangerous anti-Semitism from the far right. Because both have one thing in common. It's the Jews who are in control. It's the Jews who manipulate everything. So if you're the far left, it's a Jewish Wall Street banker. It's Jared Kushner in the White House or Steve Mnuchin running the Treasury. If you're coming from that world. If you're from the far right, it's the Jews in the media. It's the Jews in Hollywood. It's the Jews like Adam Schiff in the Democratic Party. And the reality is that the Jews themselves are becoming divided politically. And that's a shame because, there's a phrase in Yiddish, was ist Christelsach is Yiddishach. What's happening in the Christian world, via osmosis, it seeps into our world. The political climate that we're in right now, and it's not getting any better. The tide hasn't turned, it's only getting worse, is the worst scenario for Jews, and it's the worst scenario for support for Israel. Historically in America, Israel was a bipartisan issue, okay? It was irrelevant whether you were from the left or right, relevant whether you were Democrat or Republican. Today, we're seeing a very serious split, and it's used by both parties as a wedge issue. You never want Israel being a wedge issue. You want Israel being something that everyone can agree upon. I mean, there's a lot of positive things happening, but you'll never see that in the news. I'll give you an example of one of the positive things that happened. APAC, of which I'm a volunteer of and on their board, APAC brings freshman Republican and freshman Democrats. And what they did was, historically, there was always a Republican trip and a Democratic trip. What they did this year was, this past year, I apologize, they brought the trips together so that they commingled for 3 days. And instead of you being on the Democratic bus or the Republican bus, what they would do is you would choose what you wanted to see. If you wanted to see something that had relevance to you as a religious Christian, or relevance to you as a student of archaeology, or relevance to you as a student of technology, or relevance to you as someone who's interested in the military. So you chose where you wanted to go. And Republicans and Democrats went on the same bus. And we hear again and again, this is the one time that we talked with people across the aisle. We ate with them, we socialized with them, we talked about real issues. And Israel was the thing that brought us together. Now that's the positive, that's the good news. That never makes it into the newspapers. So that's on that issue. If I could just one comment. What happened in Los Angeles was not primarily, it wasn't primarily anti-Semitic. They went through 2 Jewish neighborhoods. There was a graffiti on one synagogue. There were Jewish stores, but not particularly were the Jewish stores demarcated for attack. There were many Jewish stores that were destroyed, but that was in the context of that neighborhood being destroyed. It wasn't targeting Jews per se, although the Jewish community felt, they really felt uneasy. I mean, there were neighborhoods where they were hiring private security for days, where the neighbors just chipped in together to have private security. Things, thank God, have calmed down since that point. What I'd like to address, David, is the greater question that you asked on a macro level. What are the 2 greatest challenges facing American Jewry? One of them is internal, and one of them is external. I'm going to try to limit it and be simplistic, so if anyone doesn't like what I say, or if they feel there are gaps in what I'm saying, please push me. Please push back. The external challenge, and we view this as the greatest challenge facing world Jewry, is nuclear Iran. It's the Iranian regime that right now, that Shia Islamic regime, has a caliphate. And that caliphate was given to them by the United States of America, by President Barack Obama's foreign policy, where they control from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. The Hezbollah has, that we know for sure, 130,000 rockets aimed at Israel. Many of them are really precision-guided rockets. Iran controls Syria. Israel's done an incredible job of making it difficult for the Iranians, but between the Hezbollah, between other Shia militias that have come in from Afghanistan, from other parts of the Persian Gulf, to the Middle East, they really control Syria. The Syrian government is nothing more than a puppet. They control Yemen. And, you know, the Straits of Yemen, we talk about every morning in our prayers about the Yam Suf, where the Yam Suf goes into the Gulf of Aden. That very, very narrow straits controls probably, 35%, 40% of the world's petroleum goes through there. You want to create a worldwide depression, shut down the straits. And that's what Iran could do. They're backing the Houthis. The Houthis are a Shia militia. And you've got, on the other hand, the Sunnis being backed by Saudi Arabia, but the Saudi Arabian army is not battle tested. The Iranians have the Iranian Republican Guard Corps. They're capable, they're battle tested, and they're working with the Houthis. Just yesterday, they were shooting missiles into Riyadh, into the capital of Saudi Arabia. They had missiles, projectiles coming from Yemen. So they control Yemen, Iraq. Iraq is nothing more than a puppet for the Shias, for the mullahs in Iran and Tehran. They control, obviously, based out of Tehran, they control Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. And that's a serious, serious problem. Their network of Hezbollah terrorism is on 5 continents. I mean, they've attacked Australians in Mali. They've attacked Israeli tourists in Sofia, Bulgaria. In the United States, Homeland Security discovered a ring where they were buying up cigarettes from the Indian reservations, from the Native American reservations who had a tax break. So they were making $1 billion a year selling cigarettes. I mean, they've dug tunnels for the Mexican drug cartels under the Texas and Arizona border, where they bring in operatives. That's in the United States. They're all over Europe. And Homeland Security spends an inordinate amount of money trying to track these various Shia Islamic groups that we have in the United States. And they're viewed as a very significant threat to our cities. The federal government in the United States, and that there's bipartisan support for, both Democrats and Republicans, over the last 10 years has spent a fortune of money just providing security technology for Jewish institutions. They're a real threat. And once they go nuclear, that's a game changer for them. And Israel existentially cannot tolerate them having those capabilities. Israel can't tolerate them having the ballistic missile capabilities that they're developing. The Trump administration has used crippling sanctions, and the real today is just worthless. It's drained a lot of their cash reserves. It's forced even actors like China, who are no fans of America when it comes to issues like this, to buy their petroleum other places. The Japanese, the Indians are buying their petroleum other places. Now this administration has targeted certain individuals of the Iranian Republican Guard Corps because they have heroin trade, they have all kinds of businesses in Africa, all over the world. They've targeted Turkish banks because the Turks have been a tremendous resource to the Iranians of getting hard currency, foreign currency into that country. And we are very scared. We're scared because, look, we know when it comes to dictators don't lie. You know, Hitler laid it out for us in Mein Kampf. Hitler didn't have to get reelected when he stopped democratic processes. He could say what he meant, and he meant what he said. And that's the case with the Supreme Ayatollah, and that's the case with the mullahs. Between the mullahs and the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, that we can prove, that the CIA can prove, they control 40% of that economy. So they're not going anywhere because they have everything to lose. And we just don't see, you know, like what happened in Egypt, what we saw in Tunisia, what we saw in Libya. We do not anticipate that's going to happen in Iran anytime soon. And they have a credible military. Doesn't compare to the United States. At this point, it doesn't compare to Israel. But the problem is you take Qom, Q-U-O-M-S, it's referred to as Fordo. They have a nuclear installation that right now is producing bomb-grade uranium. It's got the centrifuges are running. And the only one who could take that out is the United States of America. There's something called the MOP, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. Israel doesn't have that kind of a technology, doesn't have that kind of equipment to take out that nuclear installation. And the clock is ticking right now. The IAEA has made the report. The clock is ticking.
Can I just ask you about this? As you know, John Bolton, former Secretary of State, his book came out today. I've read as much of it as I possibly can. But there's an account that he gives that he speaks with President Trump about a situation arising where Iran comes close to the production of a nuclear bomb. What will you do? And the impression you get from reading John Bolton's account is, leave it up to Israel. Do you have confidence that President Trump would actually physically, militarily intervene if Iran came close to producing a nuclear weapon?
So I'm going to give you my opinion, and it's one man's opinion. I will answer that question dependent upon if it's before or after the election. Before the election, no way, no how. After the election is a different story. And the reason that I say that is, I don't have a close, warm, intimate relationship with Mike Pompeo, but I know those who do. And I know the way he sees the world. I know the way that Vice President Mike Pence sees the world. And I know the way that Jared sees the world, Jared Kushner. President Trump is surrounded by people who are well aware and are sensitive to what the mullahs, what the imam can do, what the IRGC can do, and how that ultimately can bring down civilization as we know it. Because I'll start with Israel. The Jews are always the canary in the coal mine, but we're always the first. We're never the last. And the world discovered that with Hitler. So after the election, I'm a little more optimistic. I will tell you this. If he were not to do it, I believe the MOP and the delivery system, the B-22 or the B-21 bombers that would be required to deliver such a weapon against Fordo, I believe would be provided to Israel by this administration. I'm fairly optimistic.
Let's assume that Joe Biden wins the election. Just three weeks ago, 18 out of 45 Democratic senators sent a letter expressing their opposition to Israel's plan to extend its sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. If that's the mood of a sizable minority of American senators, how much confidence do you have that Joe Biden may intervene militarily to stop Iran producing a nuclear weapon?
No confidence. And that answer is before and after. Well, obviously he's not a president before the election, but I have no confidence in that. My confidence is in Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, and Jared Kushner. In the Democratic side of things, I don't see it. I think Israel's on its own. Despite the wonderful relationship that the IDF has with the American military, Israel's on its own.
I mean, are we witnessing the complete erosion of what we describe as bipartisan support for Israel in the Democratic Party?
The answer to that question, see, Israel is a manifestation of there's a civil war going on as we speak in the Democratic Party. No one's using guns or knives, but it's a war. Is it going to be a center-left party, or is it going to be an extremely liberal, extremely progressive party? And right now, the progressive money is more significant. The progressive PR, coming, free press, free news time. So they're winning right now. The problem is, their policies aren't that radically different than the way Venezuela started. And I don't think Americans are that extreme. Take for instance, one of the largest group of Americans are Latino Americans. Most of them have come from Mexico. Others have come from Cuba, from other parts of Central America. They know what socialism is, and they know what socialism has done to central parts of Latin America and Central America. I don't think whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and I'm not referring to the university professors, I'm talking about the average American, whether you're Black, white, Latino, Asian, I don't think that's what the country stomachs. So right now, they're on the ascendancy. I'm speculating there's going to be pushback. And that pushback is not just that the Republicans will win over Democratic voters. I think there's going to be pushback in the party itself. And I'm not an expert on British politics, but some of the pushback we're seeing now in the Labour Party in Britain could happen in America. And that's going to determine how the party relates to Israel.
Well, we had a terrible experience with the prospect of Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister. And I have to say, I think Anglo-Jewish leaders did a tremendous job in alerting the British public to the dangers of Corbynism. From what I can see, I can't see the ADL, I can't see AIPAC acting in the same way against those elements in the Democratic Party, such as Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. The ADL seems to be, I hope I'm not doing them an injustice, but they seem to be going through a phase of, well, let's keep our heads down for the moment. Let's not be too vocal in our opposition to those elements that you've described in the Democratic Party. Am I right or wrong about this?
Nancy Pelosi has totally acquiesced to what they refer to as the squad of four. Nancy Pelosi's politics are not in line with their politics. And she really is the leader of the party today, and she's acquiesced. That's not great for America. Forget for Jews. It's for sure not good for Jews. It's not good for America. And I say the same thing if we were to look at the far right of America. It's not good for America, nor is the far left. And unfortunately, AOC in the squad, they have some very, very vocal supporters in places like academia, particularly the liberal arts departments of many schools, colleges in America. They have supporters in MSNBC and other places. So it's not great for America. And I speak not as a Jew, I speak as an American when I say that.
This begs the question. I mean, every opinion poll I've seen shows that the Democratic Party still has at least 70% of the vote, or will win 70% of the vote of American Jews. Why is that?
Well, that actually goes to the second greatest issue facing American Jewry. It's not the external threat of what nuclear Iran could do to Israel and to humanity, which is a very severe threat. We have an internal problem, and I'll use a biblical model. The 10 lost tribes, why do we call them the lost tribes? So Rabbi Akiva in the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Aseres hashvatim einam chozrim. They're not returning. Why? Because when the Assyrian Empire, which in today's terms was a huge chunk of Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, when they would conquer someone, they would do what Joseph Stalin did in the Crimea. They would literally take populations out of their native land and scatter them throughout the empire so they wouldn't rebel. The 10 northern tribes became the 10 lost tribes because within a few generations, they assimilated out. They were lost to Judaism. That's why we're called Jews, Yehudim, Yudin, because most of us are from the tribe of Judah, and a small percentage of us are Kohanim, Leviim, or we come from the tribe of Benjamin. So if I could use that analogy, in America today, it's literally the tale of two Jewish communities. The Orthodox community is exploding. Whether it's summer camps, day schools, whether it's facilities, whether it is charitable institutions, the quality and the sophistication of Orthodox life, and there's three parts of the Orthodox community in America: the Hasidic community, the Yeshivish community, and the modern Orthodox community, or centrist Orthodox community, whatever we'll call that group. All three are growing. The first two are exploding. That community, economically, educationally, in every way, not that we don't have warts and pimples. Believe me, we have warts and pimples, okay? I have to address those warts and pimples every day. But all three sectors of Orthodoxy are growing either geometrically or exponentially. On the other hand, we're losing American Jewry. It's literally the tale of two worlds. And it's a terrible indictment against us, the Orthodox, that we're allowing this to happen. Let me give us two very simple statistics to make the point. Jews under the age of 50. So 63% of American Jewry under the age of 50 is unaffiliated, no affiliation whatsoever. 12% are Reform. Both of those populations have an 83% intermarriage rate. That means the spouse does not identify as a Jew. The spouse identifies as a Mormon, an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian, but does not identify as a Jew. There's no conversion of any type, halachic, non-halachic, you name it. We're losing our people. The second statistic, because I don't have a national statistic, but the largest Jewish community on earth is the greater New York area, larger than Tel Aviv, larger than Yerushalayim. If you pull the Orthodox out, the average Jewish woman is having 1.3 children. 1.3 children before any intermarriage, before any assimilation. And that, just to reproduce yourself, you need 2.2 children per woman. Whereas the Orthodox are at 4.5. So it's literally, we're losing American Jewry. Now that American Jewry that I described, where the majority of people under the age of 50 are unaffiliated, you and I know we all worship something. The reason, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, the reason there's no prohibition against being an atheist in the Torah is because there's no such thing as an atheist. Everyone has a religion. To some, it's socialism. To some, it's self-worship. To some, it's hero worship. To some, it's capitalism. It's materialism. We all idolize and worship something. And the majority of that population, particularly amongst Generation Z, to a lesser degree amongst Generation X, that population, their worship, their religion is the far progressive world. And I'm not here to attack that or to defend it. What one's politics are is really up to them. And you can make the case for any form of politics. The problem is it becomes a religion. It becomes that which defines their reality. That's what they worship. And because of that, we have our challenges. We're a shrinking population in America, despite the growth of the Orthodox.
I think most of our listeners will be very worried, very alarmed to hear that. Can I ask this, please? President Trump, we all know that he's the first sitting president to visit the Kotel. We know that he is first to keep his word about recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He stood up to the International Criminal Court, but yet he is the most controversial president America's ever had. And he seems to attract a lot of antipathy, especially from many Jewish groups. Is he good or bad for the Jews?
It's a fantastic question. For the following reason, it's a fantastic question. Because when you look at his circle, he has a long-term relationship with David Friedman, who's now his ambassador to Israel. Jared, his son-in-law. Ivanka, his daughter. Former Congressman, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Vice President Mike Pence. Mike Pence is as great a Zionist as any Jew on earth. He believes it in his heart. It's how he reads scripture. He's he's got an incredible worldview on Israel, on the role that Israel plays for humanity. So his circle is extremely pro-Israel. And because of that, he's been pro-Israel, despite the fact that Jews have been a thorn in his side. You know, again, he's got huge support from a small percentage of American Jewry. He's got huge financial support and huge emotional support. But the majority of American Jewry, you know, Israel's not one of the factors that defines what they vote on or who they vote for. It just isn't, because it's a function of where they're at from an assimilation point of view. The problem with Donald Trump is because he's a lightning rod, you know, and there's no greater lightning rod than Donald Trump in America. So if Donald Trump is perceived as being pro-Israel, in a post-Donald Trump world, whether that will be this November or whether that'll be in 4 years from now, in a post-Donald Trump world, the backlash against Trump's policies, including Israel, which are one of his policies, are going to be very significant. They're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. What's fascinating is Donald Trump is a centrist. He's not an extremist. If you look at his economic policies, if you look at his foreign policy, you know, personally, I would disagree with the fact that he's disengaging from certain parts of the world. I think it's dangerous for the world, and I think it's the wrong policy for America. But most of what Donald Trump legislated, pushed for, stood behind, again, leave aside his rhetoric. Let's not look at the rhetoric of the man. Let's look at the actions of the man. Because the actions of Donald Trump, the president, are not very different than the actions of Donald Trump, the real estate developer, Donald Trump, the marketeer. And for decades, this man has had very warm, close relationships with the Jewish community and with the pro-Israel community. He was the Grand Marshal of the Israel Parade. He shared with me, the president, that, you know, growing up, most of the people he worked with, because most of the people that were tenants in his father's buildings were Jews. And they were proud Zionists, and they exposed him to the miracle of Israel and what Israel meant to the Jewish people and to humanity. He was exposed to this as a young man. So the challenge with Donald Trump is anything that he favors or anything he's in support of. Let's talk about some of the very positive deregulation that he's done that has enabled American business to function without the kind of shackles and handcuffs that were ridiculous, the bureaucracy that was ludicrous. So he's done many great things. But the problem is because Donald Trump, in the world is a simplistic world, everything is black and white. So if you hate Donald Trump, because there's no being neutral about Donald Trump, you're going to hate anything associated with him. And that could be terrible for Israel. That could be really bad for Israel, which is why it's a challenging question to answer. In the present, he's fantastic for Israel. In the long run, he may be terrible for Israel because of the backlash.
If the government of Israel decides to extend sovereignty over the Jordan Valley and the Yeshuvim in Judea and Samaria, see the reaction being in Congress, in the American media, and among American Jews?
It's going to be negative. The question is, like everything else in America, how long will it play out in the news cycle? Because I'm not here right now to defend if that's a decision of the Israeli government or to attack it. Okay, I'm not taking a position because that's not my place. But when anyone representing Israel sits down with those Democratic senators, shows the map, shows the positions of the original Oslo Accords, it's not as black and white as the press makes it, okay? It's not an issue of annexation. It's not illegal like you hear voices coming out of the EU. So when what's laid out, that this is the land that every Israeli government said they were going to keep. It's the settlement blocks that every Israeli government said they were going to keep. There's no expulsion of Arabs from that area. 70% of Area C, on top of everything in Area A, everything in Area B, is being given to the Palestinians. Israel will not touch that land for a minimum of 4 years, So when you look at it, it doesn't look any different than any other peace plan. The one area that the Obama administration, and that was the extreme that was untenable to Israel, was that there was going to be a multinational force monitoring the Jordan Valley, and they were going to have technology monitoring the Jordan Valley. And the ones who were against that is Israel, is Jordan. King Hussein was scared to death of having a Palestinian controlled territory, a non-Israeli defended, a non-Israeli controlled security zone next to his border. Well, we know what we're hearing I'm not talking about what you hear in the public statements, and I'm not talking about what you hear in the press, but we know what we're hearing out of Jordan, out of Egypt, out of Saudi Arabia, out of the UAE, and out of Bahrain. They're not particularly upset. And on the Palestinian street, what they're upset about is that their government, which, look, come on, that government is a criminal group of gangsters. Every one of Mahmoud Abbas's grandchildren, okay, is a multi-millionaire. And I'm talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars that was meant for his population, his people. They would love nothing more than economic opportunity. Not because they want to see Israel in the long run, not because they want a Jewish state next to them in the long run, but they believe that this Trump plan is the one plan that actually cares about them. And it takes it out of the hand of the mafiosos who run their administration.
Can I ask you this, and perhaps then Rabbi Portnoy can see if there are questions which people would like to ask you. We're going to be reading very soon in Balak how Balaam points at us and says to the king of Moab, "This is a nation that will dwell in solitude and not be reckoned among the nations of the world." Was this, I hate to use this term, but is this a curse that actually got through? We look at Israel in the UN, in the General Assembly, in the EU, in vast swathes of America, and we see that we're not very popular. None of us can really understand why. Was there truth in what Bilam said?
Those who learn the Daf Yomi, a few weeks ago, we had the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos that says that the mountain was not called Chorev. I'm sorry, the mountain's name was Chorev. So why do we refer to it as Mount Sinai? It says, Misham Yorda Sina Le'umos Ha'olam, or Le'otik HaChavim. The fact that we are unique and distinct, that we have, a unique theology, a unique way of relating to the world, that's threatening. Especially, again, we're not any better than Gentiles. We're not. If you, with the exception of the Kuzari, if you look at our great Rishonim, our great medieval scholars, every human being has an abstract intellect, meaning every human being is B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. Okay? With the exception of the Kuzari, we're not unique. We're not special. We're not better. However, we were chosen to be God's partners. We were chosen to lead a life of perfected ethical monotheism, so that as a society, as a people, we're responsible for humanity. We're responsible to mentor, to transform humanity for the better. And that's threatening, not if you're an evangelical Christian because you read Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel the way you and I read it. But anyone else, that's very threatening. And I think we've always been condemned to that existence. Just one point on the previous question. Just demographics, a fact in the demographics. Israel today, this year, is 9.1 million citizens. 75% are Jewish, 20% are Muslim, and 5% are other, Christian, Baha'i, etc. If the Muslim birth rate of about 3.1 and the Jewish birth rate of about 3.1, let's assume that continues. Israel will have a population in 2050 of 12 million people. Where are you going to put all those people? And I'm saying that if Israel chooses sovereignty, the majority of the country, I'm not talking about the desert in the Negev, but the majority of the country that can be lived and developed is Judea and Samaria. That's our history. That is where Tanakh took place. That is where the Second Commonwealth took place. And that's where Jews live now, about 650,000 of them. Okay? This policy, and again, I'm not here to attack it or to defend it. This policy is not looking to take Palestinian land. This policy is to allow free construction in the areas that exist. That 30% of Area C, and then leaving 70% of Area C, Area A, and Area B to what would become a demilitarized, peaceful Palestinian state. So where are we going to, the 3 million Jews, that's without any immigration. That's just natural growth rate of Jews and Arabs. These extra 3 million Israeli citizens, we need a place for them to live. We need to settle them. Israel right now is fast and furious becoming the greatest Jewish center on earth. I shared with you our demographics in America. We're shrinking, okay? We're shrinking, and there's a study that's going to come out from the Pew next year. And the numbers that I gave you are going back to 2013. The future numbers will look even worse. Again, just to look at it from that perspective.
Can I share a thought with you that leads off from that? I saw on, I think it was Memory, an interview with a Kuwaiti former minister who was asked about Arab opposition to Israel. And he said, look, let's be honest. Israel makes us look bad. It's a democracy. It's got a free press. It's got a Knesset. It's got a thriving economy. Human rights supply, whereas in most regrettably, in many Arab countries, the term human rights is an alien concept. And that, this Kuwaiti minister said, is the reason why there's always been opposition to Israel. It's because Israel makes us look bad. What do you think?
He was articulating, David, what you shared, what Bilam articulated. Am levadad yishkon. It's a unique, distinct nation that because of its uniqueness and distinctiveness, it will be animosity and it will be forced to live, so to speak, in a certain unique way where it will never be embraced until the Messianic era by the family of nations. That Am Livadad Yishkon, it's a blessing and a curse. It's a challenge and an opportunity to say it differently.
I think we have about 15 minutes left. I don't know if there are any members of the audience who would like to ask Rabbi Weil a question. Rabbi Portnoy?
I'm just scanning to see if there are any videos. You can turn your video on and try and unmute yourself. If you can't, then I'll try and unmute you. Don't be shy. Ah, Johnny Harounoff. Surprise, here we go. Okay, Johnny, try to unmute yourself.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you both for this very interesting discussion. Hi, Dad. My question was as follows. So much of the discussion, the political discussion, was based on the assumption that there may be a change in leadership in the US government, but Israel's government will remain the same. So I was curious about your thoughts on how you think, for example, the Democratic Party might behave towards Israel if there were a sudden shift in Israeli government and Israeli leadership. At the moment, it's clear that Netanyahu and Trump have a good relationship, but Netanyahu's not going to be in power forever, and neither is his government. So I'm curious what you think would happen once there was a shift in Israeli leadership and how that would impact Israel's relationship with the US.
Let's assume that the next administration in the US will be a Democratic administration. I don't know that that's going to be the case, but there's a poll that just came out yesterday where they had Biden 12 points ahead of Trump. Again, I'm not saying that Trump will make a comeback, but Vegas is not betting on it. Okay, they're betting on a Democratic administration, and let's assume the Democrats not only have control of the House of Representatives, but also the Senate. There's a switch between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gantz, where Benny Gantz becomes the Prime Minister. What I think Americans fail to realize, most Israelis are centrist. If you're a little bit center-right, a little bit center-left, there's very little difference between Benny Gantz and Bibi Netanyahu, between Gavi Ashkenazi, between Boogie Ya'alon. They're all within a couple degrees of separation. What the fight was in these Israeli politicians is, can we get rid of Bibi? It wasn't Bibi's positions, it was Bibi the personality. And my fear is, if they're thinking that Benny Gantz or whoever, Gavi Ashkenazi or whoever, is going to be, the great white hope, he's going to be the one that's going to change, so to speak, the Israeli relationship with America, because he doesn't have the abrasive personality, he doesn't have the arrogance and the confidence of Bibi Netanyahu, and he will be a partner with America. If you look at the Israeli electorate, and if you look at the majority of Israeli politicians, it's more about Bibi's personality than his policies. From a policy point of view, they're basically the same. And that, I don't think, is going to appease a lot of members in the Democratic Party. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my opinion.
Okay, anybody else? Can't see any hands. Last and final call. Questions?
I have a question. David, if you could help me, Rabbi Portnoy, with this. We don't understand in America how the EU has not banned doing business with the Iranian regime, especially the facts of what Israel discovered, the facts of what the IAEA has presented, knowing what Hezbollah has done on the European continent. It's very hard for us. See, we don't expect different from China because they're immoral. We don't expect anything different from Putin because he's immoral. But the Germans, the French, the British, the European continent, which stands and claims to represent certain moral values, We just don't understand how they continue to do business with the Iranians.
Well, I think as far as Germany and Austria are concerned, they've banned Hezbollah. They've banned both the political wing and the military wing. And it seems as if a number of other countries are due to follow suit. The sad reality is that the French, the Irish, and the Swedes in particular all see Iran as a rising economic power in spite of the sanctions imposed on it, and a regime which they want to do business with. It's as simple as that. It's money. We see, I mean, we have newspapers where every other day there will be some criticism of Israel. They're building a kindergarten somewhere in Judea and Samaria. But we don't see the hanging of young boys for the crime of being gay being publicized in the Guardian newspaper. It just doesn't exist. You have to go to Twitter, you've got to go onto Facebook to see this. And it's a very sad reflection of our time that Iran recognized in the EU, as you say, as the threat that it really is.
Okay, thank you, David. Rabbi Ginsbury, over to you to give us some concluding words for tonight's talk.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Portnoy. Thank you, David, for the way in which you hosted and stimulated this evening's conversation. And Rabbi Weil, how can we thank you sufficiently for giving up from what is your incredibly busy and diverse schedule to find time for the Hendon United Synod specifically in this conversation this evening. I know we have to thank our rising star here in our own community of Rabbi Portnoy, who was one who managed to convince you, but I know you didn't need an awful lot of convincing because you have this passion as an educator. We had the privilege of spending time together at the Rabbinical Council Conference a couple of years ago in Daventry, and at that conference we were just so bowled over by your personality, by your chokhmah as a Talmud Chacham of repute, the Torah you shared with us, and as you've shown us this evening, first and foremost, this incredible insight, breadth and depth of knowledge that you have of the world scene, and particularly of the American political. And it's really been eye-opening for us. I want to reflect that you shouldn't think when there was a lack of questions that it was we're a community who don't ask questions or community who don't engage. I just was scanning people across the Zoom platform this evening as you were speaking. Those who signed on remained pretty much signed on and engaged. I think they were just simply wowed by that which you shared with us. And I want to share one other thing. It was touched upon, I think, by Rabbi Portnoy in his introduction, that you a few, probably a couple of months ago now, hosted and moderated a remarkable conversation between our own Emeritus Chief Rabbi, Rabbi Lord Sachs, and Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, one of your outstanding North American rabbis. And what was truly remarkable about that conversation was that which you, in your self-effacing way, managed to elicit from Rabbi Sachs and from Rabbi Goldberg. In fact, that conversation I know is available on, I think, your own OU platform on YouTube, and I strongly recommend anyone who hasn't seen it yet to do so, because there are lessons to learn from that, which are incredibly important at this particular time, this particular situation. Rabbi Portnoy referred to the work that OU has been doing. You as Chazal tell us, sometimes the one who is the inspirational force, the Atzilus, the one who motivates and who drives behind the scenes, is even more powerful than the ones who actually deliver on the front line. You have been doing both. And we as a community and one jury is actually indebted to you and the OU for the incredible work that you're doing. We thank you, as again, we thank David tremendously for this wonderfully engaging, powerful wonderful conversation that you shared with us this evening. It's been a real treat, a real sense of enlightenment, and always with that Torah perspective, indeed, of the way in which the Jewish people are a nation who dwell alone. But in fact, David, who asked about the blessing and curse, there's one beautiful insight which the sages give. Is not a curse. The fact that a nation is not reckoned by the nations of the world can actually mean that we're not swayed and we're not phased. Lord Jacob, bless his memory, had this wonderful phrase you've heard from me, quoted from the pulpit of Rabbi close. We are not novices in the art of survival. With all of the threats that you've identified for us here in this conversation this evening, we have an absolute belief, certainty and confidence that Am Yisrael Chai, we're alive, we're pulsating, we're well today in so many good ways. We've got a tremendous amount of work yet to do and to accomplish, as we know. But Ezra Hashem, with the help of the Almighty, as we read in Parashat Shlach, we will indeed ascend and succeed. We wish you, Rabbi Weil, ongoing bracha v'atzlacha with your colleagues in America in the wonderful work that you're doing, and all of us, please God, should be able to be reunited in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, indeed with that complete and final redemption in Heirav Yameinu. Thank you all so very much indeed.
Amen. Have a good evening, everyone.